So first of all, thanks for staying so late and joining me in the very last presentation of Sphere IT 2022 conference. I hope you're gonna enjoy it. So, I'm Mike, and today I'm going to show you how you can build better domain models and save days of unnecessary work by using something I call domain experiments. We are having very limited time, so let's get straight to the point. So let's start with a story of some project. It's called Crowdsourcery. It's a crowdfunding platform supporting passive investments. So Crowdsourcery had a great team of experienced developers, awesome idea, applied all the best rules, test-driven development, domain-driven design, and best infrastructural practices. So it seems they were deemed to succeed. So what was the result? It was a total failure. Yeah? So the question is, why did it happen? And it happened because we as human beings are unable to know what we need up front, right? So building software and designing software is actually nothing more than just discovery and learning experience. So this particular team failed because they didn't realize about it. Instead of revalidating the domain model, what they were doing is creating costly prototypes. And by prototypes, I mean building everything from scratch, including infrastructure, UI, application layer, and all that kind of stuff. So, prototype seems like a good idea, right? But the problem with prototypes is that the feedback loop of the learning rate, and because of the limited feedback loop, is simply too slow. So, all the infrastructure and that kind of stuff slows us dramatically. OK, so maybe let's get to the basics. Why do we write software? In most cases, to solve business problems, actually, right? That's why we are actually doing this. So if I were to summarize in 3 points why projects fail, that would be, it can happen that projects can fail because of CV-driven development when developers are not actually taking ownership, but just trying new stuff and playing with technology so they can be proud of it in the CV. Yeah, everyone did it. Yeah, I was also culprit here, but it's usually not the main reason. The second reason might be something like lack of technical skills. But again, you can always learn technical skills. So it's not so extremely important. And in my opinion, the main reason is that since development is about learning and experiencing and experimenting with stuff, we are simply learning too slow. Yeah? That's, in my opinion, the main reason. We are adapting too slow. We are not changing the model rapidly enough. So what can we do about it? Yeah, natural, obvious. We need to learn faster. But what's the best way to learn? So it happens that we, most of the time, learn best by practice, by experimenting with stuff, right? When you want to teach something, when you want to teach a child something interesting, you usually give examples. Yeah? That's what talks to us the best. And practical science and engineering is actually all about it. So the question is how we can write these experiments in code. As I mentioned, prototypes might be a good idea, right? If we lived in an ideal world, we could create prototypes all the time, pay for them, and receive full-blown feedback, including all the layers up to the users, right? But the problem is, as I said, that prototypes are not cheap. You need to build a lot of stuff. And because it's not cheap, it's also cheap not only in terms of financial things, but cheap, they're not cheap in terms of time. So we are not simply learning fast enough. OK, so instead, what we can do is run experiments directly on the domain model. OK, so how can we run these experiments? There are 2 types of experiments I actually found out. So the first type is initial experiments. And these are usually experiments on the greenfield, when you're building something new. It's usually extremely chaotic, but learning is exponential. Then we have life experiments. And life experiments are basically challenging upfront decisions. So you mostly run experiments based on some legacy assumptions, based on some legacy software. OK, so how can we run initial experiments? And we will be focusing mostly on initial experiments during this presentation because of the limited time. So I usually start with example mapping. Example mapping is a technique which translates requirements into a collection of examples. Then we adjust the model to the examples, so our model can actually express and satisfy the examples. Then we need to verify the model. And by verifying, I mean trying to break it somehow. So we need to check if our domain model actually allows us to do that, and can we break it somehow that we, for instance, can do more than we are supposed to, right? So it's I coined the term code storming, actually, because it might be a good idea to actually ask everyone in the team to run mob programming in this step. I am not a fan of mob programming, but in this case, it might work. So we are challenging the model, trying to break it, asking other to, again, challenge the model together, and then asking everyone for a review, right? So these are, again, initial experiments are extremely chaotic, but we are learning a lot. OK, so what about live experiments? It's usually the same, but there is one difference. We are usually trying to isolate things, because as I mentioned, we are usually working with legacy software. So we are also starting with example mapping, but then we can, for instance, create an isolated branch if we are using branches, called, I don't know, for instance, experiment and then some new feature name, right? It's just an experiment. So then we again start hacking the model, checking if it's working or not. But what we are actually doing is that we are not building something completely new. We might create some isolated package, some isolated module, copy-paste the existing classes, and start working based on the copies and not on the original files. Yeah? In this case, copy-paste might not be so bad. OK, then you verify by creating a PR, for instance, or challenging the model, that kind of stuff. And if what's important, if experiment is accepted, we need to somehow record it. So we can use, for instance, ADR, architecture decision records, to record it. OK, so it usually also happens that the experiments cannot easily compile, cannot be merged easily, and that kind of stuff. So it might also happen that we are just accumulating knowledge, and after having enough knowledge, we can actually start a completely new branch, for instance, and then create something which is mergeable. OK, so thing is that about live domain experiments is that they can be valuable only if they are not lasting long enough. So at most, pull requests should last no longer than 1 day. If you're using pull requests, the review time window should be no longer than 1 day. OK. The problem with experiments is that if team is actually unwilling to learn, if they cannot challenge the previously made decisions, basically we can do anything about it, right? We are doomed. We shouldn't even try with the experiments. It will just waste our time. So experimenting requires a team which can accept that we made some mistakes and we need to reiterate over them. OK, I mentioned about the ADRs. Yeah, the point about ADRs when when experiment is accepted is that at some point we might need to go back and try to understand why we made such a decision about the domain model. And in such case, we might think, OK, someone made something extremely stupid. But when we looked back at the ADR, there's actually a context explaining why something was happening. So that's why experiments should be always followed by successful experiments should be always followed by ADR. OK, so why do I mention so much about the example mapping, right? Because as I said, in my opinion, there is no other way to learn by examples. We are learning by doing stuff, right? And the other thing is that examples are actually clarifying stuff. We are creating common language with business, and we can discuss if it's working correctly or not. OK. So when we do two things, combine example mapping with test-driven development, where that's the point where it shines. OK, so I'll show the demo of initial experiments now. OK, so let's start with event storming session, a very little event storming session, starting by a big picture. At the beginning, we got stuff like project funded, investment made, project defaulted, project repaid. A lot of stuff actually happening here. And what we do after that, we are trying to find processes. Let's imagine we found, yeah, there are a lot of techniques, pivotal events, swim lanes and that kind of stuff. But at this point, I just wanted to show some two processes that we find when we're actually talking about the flows. So there are two main flows in our example. The first one is fundraising, the second is investing. We will focus on fundraising. So in fundraising, the flow is like that. The borrower first registered, then schedule can be accepted, then project can be started, project can be cancelled, funds can be received, and final project can be funded. So that's the process about it. And now what we would do is we are going to focus on a given process, like starting a project here, and try to use example mapping. Example mapping, yeah, there are the green ones, green sticky notes here. The green sticky notes actually are some examples, not necessarily expressing given when then. They mustn't be strict enough. The idea is it's OK, for instance, OK when less than $10,000 need to be verified manually. When more than $10,000, the schedule is a case where schedule is accepted, where schedule is not accepted. And here, for example, adult borrower starting a project and borrower without criminal records starting a project. So these are the examples. Nothing especially detailed, as you can see. The blue ones are rules, but I'm usually starting with green ones and then finding the rules about it. But the most important part is that after having very, very limited set of codes, what I am doing, I am not adding more sticky notes. I am actually starting writing code immediately. And I'll show you how it can be made. So a very simple demo. I'll create a new test. Let's call it example mapping test. OK, it's in Java. OK, so here I'm doing something like initial experiments or crowdsourcery initial experiment. OK, and then what I'm doing, I am actually having some scenarios for it. So we can even wrap it, maybe call it a bit differently, crowdsourcery starting a project. And I don't want to create a nested class, so that would be easier for demo reasons. So now we are having, you see the name starting a project, it's exactly the same, starting a project. And then we are having first, adult borrower starts a project. We are having nothing, completely nothing, no code at all. So what we do, given adult borrower, when borrower wants to start a project, then project is started. Yeah. The very first definition, there are no rules yet. Just we start with nothing. And what we do now is that we are actually starting building code according to this. So given borrower, we are not having class borrower. Let's create it. OK, it's created. OK, instantiated. Great. Now borrower, for instance, we want something to start the project. So we need something to accept it. I don't know. Let's call it project starter or handler. Doesn't matter. Project starter. The name is not important at this stage. OK, so we have something. OK, let's instantiate it. OK, and now we start project by. Right? So again, creating the method. We are not having a method. And start project by, then by borrower, right? We add the borrower as a parameter, OK? So yeah, the code is starting to emerge. And now we need, then project is started. How we can express that project is started? For instance, by events. So what we can do now is we are telling that we need something called domain events. Yeah, we don't have class domain events. I'm creating one. Okay, I created domain events, and now I'm changing the start project byte to return domain events. Yeah, okay. Yeah, it just compiled, but it doesn't work yet, right? But yeah, we will find it later. So what we can do now, we are expressing that domain events, for instance, has occurred event of type, something like that. Okay, yeah, this red. We don't have a method. Yeah, okay. So and now we can pass stuff like project started. Yeah, we don't have project started, so let's create a class project started. Okay. Yeah. Again, has occurred event type. We need to add a parameter. Okay. So now we want to say that we want it to return actual boolean, right? So project was started, okay? And what we do is we make has occurred method to actually return boolean, right? And then we are having an assertion. So project was started. Assertions. We are using assert j, a popular library in Java. It's true. Yeah. So yeah, I'm not going to through all the steps. We don't have enough time, but I wanted to show you how we can proceed from examples written on sticky notes, for instance, to actually start building the domain code around it, just expressed on the example. And when we have completely nothing, we are building the language this way, and then we are adding more and more and more and more examples, and rules start to emerge. So what I'll do now, I'll move a bit fast forward to the next comment here. Maybe let's clean it. Domain experiments. Okay, git clean stuff. Okay. Yeah. So what we are having here is previously written code with some more examples. You see, we are having a nice naming here. For instance, example mapping test, starting a project, given adult borrower, and borrower wants to start the project. Yeah, this is the reporting. And then I'll move again forward to the next step. Yeah, we are still talking about initial experiments. So now we start to actually add in some rules. So the next example, again, taken directly from my board, is given borrower who is 17 years old. When borrower wants to start a project, then project is not started. Yeah? So we are expressing it. And again, going to the next step, we are adding more and more. And now we are having more strict rules. Given borrower who is younger than 18 years old, so when borrower wants to start a project. And we are actually expressing it through parameterized test. So when we run it, we again have quite nice reporting, and looks like this. So starting a project, given borrower who is younger than 18 years old, blah, 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 given borrower 17, 16, 8, 8, 4, 8, 4, 2, and 1, it doesn't allow for such borrower to start a project. Okay. And then by iterating, we are also applying refactor steps. So in the previous step, we had a very naive implementation where borrower accepted class H, which is stupid. So in the next step, we actually replace it with borrower of H with current date. Instead of H class. Yeah, that's natural, that's obvious, but I'm showing you that we can make stupid mistakes during experiments, and it's no problem. We can change them immediately. Okay, and what's important now is that we are still working on code, but we are gaining new insights about it. And you see, the step 4 is marked as the first breakthrough. The first breakthrough, we are still working on code. We are still working on examples expressed as tests. So these tests give us actually feedback about how our domain model can be built. And at this point, we started thinking about it in the next step and came to the conclusion that actually it doesn't make sense for us to allow borrowers to even create an account borrowers who are not adults to even create accounts for us. So that's a breakthrough in the model. We don't have much code. We can change that very easily and very cheaply. So we simply say, OK, anyone can start a project, but we have new case, new borrower registers. And we move the responsibility that to the spot that only adult borrowers can register their accounts. That's our new finding. Yeah? And then, OK, there are quite new things happening here. We found out that there are things like registries, et cetera, et cetera. And this actually can be expressed also on microboards. So based on code, we can have feedback to our example mapping session. As you can see in the next step, it doesn't make sense to say adult borrower starts the project. It doesn't make sense because we simply don't allow them for non-adults to create an account. So instead, we created a new scenario, new borrower registers, and now we are having some rules like more than 8 years old and less than 18 years old. OK, and again, by going through these iterations, we are having new finding about the domain model. So when we again move fast forward here, again, here we had borrower without a criminal record can start a project actually, but again, we don't want to have borrowers who are criminals. We don't want to have users who are criminals. So again, it moves to the new borrower registers. And there are new concepts like borrower registry. And again, you can see that it's expressed directly here in examples like person with criminal record cannot register her account, right? My point is that by looking at code, by looking at examples, we actually having good examples, meaningful examples, which are a way to create a big ubiquitous language from the domain-driven design and actually talk with business and clarify if we are on the right track or not. OK, so 3 minutes left. I will move forward again and check out the newest version of the code. And here we are having, again, more and more rules about the behaviors. So for instance, here we are having a behavior regarding starting a project with given proposal of value. You see there is a name proposal here. It's again created with code given project proposal of 9,000. And we are having borrowers to start a project and that kind of stuff. And I'm usually using, by the way, DSL for test to express like a factory method. So project proposal of total value here, for instance, $10,000. And you see, we are actually using building blocks, and we are using concepts from the domain language, which arises again from the code directly. So there is a new thing called project proposal, for example. Yeah. So we don't simply start project. We start project based on some proposal, and it can be rejected or accepted. So again, when we go back here, we can see that there are completely new findings, and also some new events like project proposal accepted for verification, which we found out when writing examples in code. Then there are also more things like project proposal and project proposal supervisor, which we again created only when we were writing code. There are a lot of edge cases, and the code verifies it. So it verifies that there is a need for some more things. So we are having feedback back, and we can update our board according to this. OK, so that's how we can proceed and move forward, both in initial experiments and in live experiments. The idea is, though, that in live experiments, as I said, we are usually having an isolated branch with isolated package where we are trying to hack stuff. And you see, the point is that when we are focusing on the domain model, we actually start learning very fast, having new insights, and we don't need to build infrastructure, application layer, UIs, and that kind of stuff. just to learn and verify if everything is working. The code actually verifies if we are on the right track, and the code allows us to create language, which we might use to clarify the requirements. Okay, we don't have much more time. I would be happy to talk about it later if you want to. So about the differences of live experiments and initial experiments, for example. So basically, that sums it up. Here is a link to the example repository. You can just search me for domain experiments, Mike Wojtyna, and you will find it. So thank you very much, and thanks for being here. If you like what I've just said, if you enjoyed the idea of domain experiments, and you're interested in clean code, domain-driven design, test-driven architecture, test-driven development, and clean architecture, that kind of stuff, you can join me on howtobe.pro. That's a training program. 32% discounts for all Sphere IT attendees. Just reply back a message to me that you met me at Sphere IT. And that will be all. You can contact me at mike@wojtyna.pl or find me on LinkedIn. So thank you very much, and let's get to the questions.
So we don't have that much of a time limitation right now, but I guess some of us would like to go home finally. So maybe 2 questions. There's one. We can count on you on every presentation.
Okay, thanks for a great presentation. It was very inspirational, and I like the approach. I think it's very systematic and it helps a lot. But my question is about decision-making process, and I have an example. I think in my opinion, you made one very suspicious decision, and this is related to this requirement about registration.
Yep.
So being an adult is, of course, one-way ticket. So
Yep.
you can be always you cannot be younger,
Yep.
unfortunately. But not having criminal records, it's not one-way ticket. So I'm not really sure that this decision, moving to this registration, was the correct decision. For example, from the legal point of view or the system requirements. And I know that this is just a demo, but in the real world case scenario, how you solve this issue?
Yeah, so first of all, we are running experiments to actually learn something. So if I were talking with a domain expert and the domain expert said something that it doesn't make sense, we are having a dialogue, we are having a conversation, and that's the whole point of running domain experiments. So if you point out that something is wrong, that's awesome. That's all about it, right? That's why we are actually running domain experiments, to have early feedback about the behavior of the system. And find out all the inconsistencies. So I would only greet it and say, yeah, that's awesome.
You just share with your whole thinking process, it was live coding, and we had a chance to spot this. But I imagine that you were coding this alone, and then someone may miss this thing, and it will be already implemented.
Yeah, coding this alone. I actually shouldn't be coding this alone only because I'm not doing this for myself. I'm doing this to learn, to experiment. So we should have someone to talk about it. So I said that there might be a good idea to have a mob programming at this stage, and only this stage. I'm not a fan of mob programming in general. But what's also important is that we actually should share our findings, not only with developers, but also with domain experts. So we are having examples, right? We learn by examples. So if we created some examples explaining the system, we should ask and ideally daily with some domain expert to verify, okay, are we on the right track? You see, this is the example we can create or we can start and that kind of stuff. And then we are having a communication. And that's the most important part of it. So you should verify it. You are not making decisions on your own. You are making findings and verifying these findings with domain experts and the rest of the team if you're on the right track.
Okay, thanks a lot.
One more question.
Okay, and what about the experiments that require, traffic, some kind of users,
You mean,
consumers?
for instance, benchmarking, that kind of stuff, right? You mean about performance, for instance, right? You mean?
No, not performance, but let's say I want to make the experiment, I don't know, make the button green and not blue.
Yeah, about you mean
And,
A/B testing, actually.
Yes, it was very trivial, okay. But let's say I'm making new feature. So,
Okay.
for example, I'm making new recommendation engine for our users, and I want to see if this experiment will work, if user even want to have this thing or not, and if it's work better or worse.
Yeah. So you still apply all the same tools you used to apply when you experimenting with users. This is a different kind of experiment. What I mean by domain experiment, these are cheap experiments. We can verify if the internal team is on the right track on the same and using the same language and building the same product and having the same vision about it. So that's about domain experiment. It happens in very, very fast iterations. And what you mean is actually product market fit. So creating such product that actually satisfies the needs of a customer, in fact. And this is completely different kind of experiments. I am running both. Yeah? I was running startups in past. So I also was running business experiments based on the behavior of users, also ran A/B testing and that kind of stuff. So you still do that. And based on the feedback what users want, you can actually change some of the decisions and change the vision of what you're building. You can pivot, for instance, create something new, but then again, in-house, when you're building the software, based on these new assumptions, you might have a breakthrough in the domain model. And what you do is you start doing domain experiments, how to adjust it to the new requirement, new business requirement, find out during market evaluation. So you run both things, but these are different kind of experiments. What you meant is just collecting
thanks.
experience.
All right. I think it's time to wrap up. Thank you for the presentation. Good stuff. Thank you.
Thank you.